looking back towards like the history of psychology, right? What is one of your favorite psychologists, and what impact did they have on the field of study?
So I would probably say Carl Jung. He he was in like the 50s and 60s. He basically put forward the whole idea of the shadow self. It's pretty big now. He's kind of a either you love him or you hate him.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of controversial with some of his stuff. So basically his main idea was that to be whole, you have to integrate your lighter and your darker side. So there's actually a quote by him which I really like. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And I really like that because I think that highlights a huge misunderstanding we have about enlightenment or being whole. You know, I think we're all searching for that feeling of feeling whole and complete, but we almost look for it in kind of synthetic ways, if that makes sense. So it's like he was basically saying to be a full human and to be true to yourself, you have to acknowledge that kind of darker part of yourself that you really don't want to. You know, we all have those either lazy habits or, you know, those parts of ourselves that we're kind of like, I don't really like that. You know, that makes me uncomfortable. But he's saying that if we're going to be genuine, we have to acknowledge that part. You know, it can't just be super happy and positive all the time. It's like you have to deal with those negative emotions too, you know. And I don't even like the word negative because I think they're both just two sides of the same coin. It's just they feel bad, but I think they have equally as important teachings in them. Some of those kind of darker moments in your life are what end up being some of the greatest catalysts, you know? Like I think back to some of the most stressful moments in my life, and they forced me to deal with so many things that I didn't want to deal with, but I needed to. You know, it made me grow in ways that I never would have grown if I didn't face that stress, if I didn't deal with that.
When you're talking about like the darker side of things, I can easily pick out like the darker situations or things that have happened to me, right? Like, oh, this bad thing happened to me. I turn that into a positive. You know what I'm saying? Yay. But I have a hard time like reflecting and picking out like the darker parts of my character. You know what I'm saying? That's a scarier thing to look inward on, you know? It's really easy to be like, life fucked me up over here. You know what I'm saying? You know, because it's like the blame is off of you. And I'm pretty good at turning a bad situation into a positive, but how do I look inward and figure out the darker parts of my character and like who I am, and how do I turn those into positives? Or is it better to just deal with those demons and work around them?
It's really not a long process, but it's not like an overnight shift. You know, I really wish it was to be a lot easier. For me, going to therapy really helps just because it's a safe place where I can express those darker sides of myself comfortably and process them together. So that's why I really just am in love with this whole field, because it gives people an opportunity to express something that they may have been holding in for years and just never were comfortable enough with somebody to do that. Basically, a lot of stuff that Jung talks about is if you don't deal with those darker sides, they're going to show up in other ways. You know, so for me, for example, I'm really bad at expressing myself. So whether that's anger, any sort of confrontation with people, I don't know how to do it well. So I bottle up so many emotions. As a therapist, it's clearly not good. It's not what we're supposed to be doing. But it's crazy because it always comes out eventually. And when I bottle it up for so long, it all comes out at once in the worst way possible. You know, so maybe I'll just explode on somebody that it wasn't even close to whatever they did. You know, the magnitude of my reaction was way over, but it wasn't just because of that one thing. that have been building for years potentially, you know? So it's like if you don't deal with those things, it's not like they just go away.
Yeah.
They just find other ways to come out, you know?
So you weren't good at expressing things, so you had to get better at expressing yourself quicker, right?
Yes.
So you didn't use that darkness as a positive, right?
Mm-hmm.
You tried to fix it or something. Once I started doing the podcast, I realized I'm not a very good listener, right? I usually just talk a lot, you know, at people, and I don't even, like, while they're talking to me, I'm usually just already thinking of what I'm going to say next, you know? And the podcast really made me be like, oh, I need to listen more.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like I leaned into that darkness and was like, fuck it, I always have something more important to say than people, you know? Like, I had to deal with that and change it. I feel like at times I could be a little egotistical, or I could be a little superficial. What should I do with those darker parts of myself? Should I be less egotistical, but maybe then I wouldn't be pushed as hard to, like, start my own company and be successful? Should I suppress those things, or should I?
No.
What do you do about? So what do I do with that? You know,
that's the interesting kind of way of his philosophy around all this. It's not repressing or suppressing it. It's acknowledging it and kind of, like you were saying, figuring out, okay, how does this fit with who I am? You know, how can this may seem like a bad thing, but, like, can it be a good thing? You know, could this possibly be something that drives me? Or like for me, could it help me speak up for myself more? That's clearly not a good thing to do, just to bottle things up. But when that's your natural way of dealing with things, that's just how you do it. But kind of digging through that, it's basically like for me, when I think about it, I'm going to go through more uncomfortable situations because of dealing with that. You know, maybe I'll express myself more and that will make people uncomfortable. But in the long run, it just feels healthier. Like, I will be more okay with myself because I won't be building things up and letting emotions just kind of slowly grow inside of me. Like, I'll feel more at peace with myself, and I feel like other people will respect that I actually said something and I spoke up.
Searching through those things and acknowledging them, does that sort of help take the blame away from, like, you being that thing? Because I feel like, remember I was saying, if a shitty thing happens to me in life, I really clearly see how I can turn that into a positive, right? But with something like I don't speak up for myself, or I'm egotistical, there's so much blame and guilt to that darkness of you, right? That it hurts. It's part of it, sort of treating it like a life situation, like, oh, life just made me egotistical. That's just happened to me. Kind of disassociating yourself from that darkness so that you can deal with it without hating yourself, you know?
Yeah, where it's not so painful that it's kind of unbearable.
Yeah. Is that part of
I'd say
the philosophy?
That right there is the art of therapy. Figuring out, how do I help this person deal with something that's so emotionally overwhelming for them, which is why they've never dealt with it. Like, how do I go through that process and not bring them to that, like, shock state of, like, this is too much, but enough that they actually work through it and experience those feelings.